Welcome everybody to the Santa Cruz Queer History webinar series. This is our 7th webinar here. A couple webinar protocols. If you would mute your device, people who are not the speakers, it makes it easier. If you have any questions or comments as we go along, please do type in the chat room. If you have an iPad, we don't know where the chat room is, but maybe those of you who do might be able to find it and tell us where it is. We've got some questions we're going to ask the speakers as we go along. If you have any questions, just type them in there. If you want to hang out afterwards, after the recording, you're welcome to do so. We are recording this at this point, but we turn off the recording towards the end so that we can all just chat and talk about whatever at that point. If you've got feedback, please share it on my website at this point is www.robdarrow.us, and the Mon Diversity Center websites also have this information, but just wanted you to know that if you've got other information, that would be great. And I'm happy to announce today, for the first time, the opening of the Santa Cruz MA Queer Santa Cruz exhibit. There's the link at the bottom of this. If you just Google Santa Cruz MA Queer Santa Cruz exhibit, you'll find it. These are all the different sections. So we will enjoy hearing all of your feedback and how these webinars interface with them. And in the future, we will have some special webinars just to talk about the new exhibit that is currently a virtual exhibit. And when this pandemic ends, we will have a better, we'll get to view the exhibit as well. So just so you all know, my name's Rob Darrow, and I'm here with George Kameny. We'll be the facilitators for this webinar. These are co-sponsored by the Santa Cruz MA and the Santa Cruz Diversity Center. And again, as I mentioned, once the pandemic is over, hopefully you'll come visit the Santa Cruz MA and see the live ones. So I wanted to share a little background with you as far as Santa Cruz County queer history. It's important to realize that the Santa Cruz County queer history parallels the national LGBTQ history movement. People in Santa Cruz impacted that national movement. The national movement impacted the overall Santa Cruz movement as well. With UC Santa Cruz and Cabrillo College coming in the 1960s, that further enlightened our community in a variety of different ways. And for people who've lived here a while, I think most of us agree that Santa Cruz County has always been a pretty inclusive community, and it's a very unique place. And because of that, that's how many of us ended up here, some by birth, some by choice. So we'll hear more about that in a minute. The other thing to know is that overall, the broader LGBTQ history, in the 1950s, there was a thing called the Lavender Scare, where LGBTQ people were removed from government and military. As a result of that, some groups organized the Mattachine Society in Los Angeles and the Daughters of Bolitas in San Francisco. The Compton's Cafeteria riots occurred in 1966 in San Francisco, which some people don't know about. And then there's the Stonewall riots in 1969 in New York, which many people mark that as an important moment in LGBT history. But it's important to realize that Santa Cruz really began organizing around 1974, and then 1975 was the first Santa Cruz Pride event. But as I continue to talk to more people around Santa Cruz, I've learned that in the 1970s, there was the first women's music festival in the Santa Cruz Mountains, attended by many of the lesbian people that lived in Santa Cruz at the time. In 74, as I mentioned, LEGMU organizes, we have Pride. In 1983, there was an AIDS information meeting held at the County Health Department, and in 1985, the Santa Cruz AIDS Project was founded. So those are some of those key moments. Oh, the other important date I should have put in there was the Briggs Initiative, which was at the end of the 70s. But aside from all that, today we're focusing on the Diversity Center, which was founded in 1989 and continues on today. So in 1988, there were community meetings. They took place to discuss a gay and lesbian center, and it was officially established in 1989 as the Santa Cruz Lesbian and Gay Community Center. So that's a little history, and now what's more important is to hear from our guest today a little bit about that history. So I'm gonna switch to this other view so that you get this view. And our first question for all of our guests is, first, what brought you to Santa Cruz, and how did you first get connected with the Santa Cruz Diversity Center? We're gonna start with Bob, and then go to Jim, and then Sharon, and then Denny. So Bob, what if you start us off with that?
Yeah, so what brought us to Santa Cruz? From my part of it, I would say to you that we I was born and raised in the Bay Area. In fact, my parents actually honeymooned in Santa Cruz in 1943 for 2 weeks. So I came here as a kid all the time. Grew up in the South Bay and went to school growing up there. And so it's always been a part of my life. I've always known how welcoming and what a great community there is here. There's, the parks, the weather, everything. So I always visioned this as a place to actually come and live. And then during the coming out process, and then a few years later, meeting Denny, and we lived in the Bay Area then in Pleasanton. And so we always knew that we wanted to come here and found our way here permanently in 1998.
Great,
That's
thanks.
the short version, and Denny can fill in some blanks later.
Jim, you're next.
Let's see. Like Bob, Santa Cruz has always been a place that I have spent time. My grandparents lived here since probably 1970. So I had been coming here as a child to spend time with my grandparents. And when I was in college in Virginia, I actually had a moment where I was ready to move to Santa Cruz and go to UCSC and study computer science there. And my parents talked me out of that. But as soon as I had the opportunity, I moved back here. Mostly because of the natural beauty of the place. I didn't have much of a connection to the Santa Cruz community per se. I just loved the beauty here. So that's what drew me here in 1995. Do you want me to hit the second part of the question too?
Why don't we save that part?
Okay.
We'll do that when you introduce yourself more later. Okay. Sharon, how about you? What brought you to Santa Cruz?
I went to UC Santa Cruz, so that's what got me here. But I did grow up in the South Bay, so not so far away. And part of my decision to go to UCSC was I thought it might be a good place to come out, which I did. So that helped get me here to Santa Cruz.
Great. And Denny?
Well, I guess what I need to add is that we bought a house here in 1993, Bob and I. I met Bob in 1984, by the way, and we lived mostly in Pleasanton all those years. So in 1998, we decided, well, we always knew that we were going to retire here in Santa Cruz. So in 1998, we did. We moved and sold the house, and this has been home since. And I guess to add to Bob's, yes, I've always obviously loved Santa Cruz. We've had friends over here and been visiting throughout the 80s. And a great place to live and retire in.
Great. Do you want to share a little bit about how the Diversity Center got started, or the Lesbian and Gay Community Center got started, Denny?
Yeah, I put together what I could put together was derived from old newspaper articles and old newsletters, and also a lot of input from people from the past, like. Unfortunately, some of them have passed away. But anyways, let me go through this. I did sort of sketch out a timeline here. In the 80s, there was a lot of talk toward the latter 80s of putting together a community center, and the meetings actually started not at a place that we would lease, but at the Loudon Nelson Center and sometimes at people's homes. A couple of times a month, these meetings were held back in 1980. Probably starting in early 88. Those sort of represent the first LGBT community center meetings. Some of those people involved, by the way, and I'll mention the names here because some people know these folks. Kathy McCrae, and I had chatted with her before she passed away last year. She was involved at the beginning. Mindy Storch, William Russell, Allison Clark, John Riviera, and Lee Rodden and Christopher Spillers. And this I saw in an article. There's probably a lot more people involved, but about 50 of these people started raising money for to get a physical site for the center. They thought, at least $5,000 to do that. And they did. They actually pulled it together, and it didn't really happen until 1990 that they did move to the space in Commerce Lane. But they did, in fact, at the same time, start filing paperwork with the IRS to form a 501c3. And it was called the Santa Cruz Lesbian and Gay Community Center, LGCC. Was officially recognized by the IRS on February 6, 1989.
Wow.
The board president in those days, it was called the chair/co-chair. And that position alternated annually between a woman and a man, one serving as chair and then the other as co-chair and alternating. Some of this, I do have a lot of names, which I'll share in a document for you later, Rob, but some of those early board members, and we can get that, we get that saved for posterity, I guess. The new site that they put together and moved, they cleaned up and moved into in March 1990 was about 800 square feet at 1332 Commerce Lane. That's the little alley road that parallels Pacific Avenue between Church and Walnut. And right across from the parking, it's the parking, two-story parking structure. That, of course, was the first space and walk-in center, and later on, to save rent in the latter 90s, and I don't have the exact date, they moved a couple of doors down to 1328, having the rent, paying for 400 square feet. And then back in, I'm going to give you some sketchy things here, and the things sort of fell apart in the 90s, and I'm not sure why. Although I do know that in the board in October '92 added bisexual to the name, and then transgendered, D-E-R-E-D, that by the way, was added to the name in 1993. And the official name became the Santa Cruz Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender Community Center. I know that cumbersome acronym, SCLGBTC, really well because I used to answer the phones when we first volunteered in 1998. For some reason, I guess adding bisexual and transgender, and I don't know the full story here, was very controversial in the community. And there was some things I can't write about because I have no idea why. But you almost can tell, reflected in the title of the newsletters over the years, that it was a controversial thing. The first newsletter was just called LGCC News and Views. Then it was changed to something called As Good as It Gets. And then after a year or so, it was changed to the LGCC newsletter. Then in 1993, it was changed Lesbian, Gay, and Bisexual Community News for Santa Cruz County. And then it was finally changed to Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Queer, and Transgendered and Beyond Labels, News and Views. And then 1997, the title became Manifesto, which later was an independent newspaper, but still under the umbrella of the center. And when we jumped into the game in 1999, we chose the name Communicure. For some reason, activists and people abandoned the center for various reasons toward the end of the 90s. And it was just a skeleton organization, but still surviving when we became involved. Unfortunately, I have more details, but I won't share them now. That's sort of a good summary of, unfortunately, I don't know, and I have been trying to contact people that were involved in the early days. Either they don't, they have a problem with memory. A couple of people I did talk with were involved. In fact, their names were on the original paperwork, but they just can't remember much of anything back then. and some of the other people have passed away. I really wish I had talked with Kathy McCrae a lot more. Before she passed away, that was sudden, and she had a heart attack last year. So that's a good summary, I think, of until we stepped in 1999, and we'll talk about that later, I guess. 1998, I should say.
Great. I want to share some of those things that you talked about. So here's some photos of the first Santa Cruz Lesbian Gay Community Center. There's the workers. I don't recognize any of those people. Maybe some of you do. Here were the articles that were written.
That was Ellen. Sorry.
These were the headlines, a centering of gay energies, and gay folks find a home for a center, were some of the newspaper articles from those early years. And then there's the LGCC news that Denny was talking about, and members elect different officers. And that's interesting to know there was a male and a female. So you can see that year was Patrick Meyer and Marty Brown as the chair and the co-chairs. So, and then finally there was a proclamation by the Santa Cruz County Board of Supervisors that said April 20th, 1989 marked the first anniversary of the Santa Cruz Lesbian and Gay Community Center. So it's kind of interesting that those different pieces were used at different years. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure everybody saw those since you talked about them, and I'll turn it back over to George to ask these other questions.
So I was hoping, I wanted to go back to Denny really quick, because there's a really great question, and we were hoping you could elaborate a little bit about the background and work that you did before you were in Santa Cruz County and with the Diversity Center. But I would love if you could also lead us into how that helped evolve what the Diversity Center was and what it became as you walked into the organization.
Well, when we
he's referring to high-tech gay, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, Bob. Well, Bob and I had some experience with LGBT activism, I suppose you'd call it, and that is because the High Tech Gays organization was co-founded by myself and Rick Rudy and a couple other people, actually, back in 1983, and that, of course, became a very, very big organization throughout the 80s. And Bob, when I met Bob in 1984, he became our newsletter editor, amongst other things. I was secretary all those years, early years of High Tech Gays, and Rick Rudy was president. And we were involved, both in social and political activism. We even ran a survey once upon a time with high tech companies throughout Silicon Valley, and got some pretty interesting replies. But so that along with our business experience, I had actually was an engineer with AT&T. I'm not sure that's called business experience, but Bob owned his own business in Pleasanton. And so that, we felt qualified for helping out in the center. George, how far are we taking this from, are you asking questions about the day we walked into the center and then what happened beyond that?
Yeah, well, I really love how you walked us through the different, for example, names that the center went through. So I'm just wondering, like, how else did the center evolve while you were there? And then I would also love if maybe Sharon could take that after you're done.
Oh, good. Well, this really is a team effort with myself and Bob. He and I walked into the center in November 1998. I'm sorry, 1998. And it was open, and a fellow by the name of Ray Mortz, a lot of the old timers remember Ray, was volunteering. And in fact, that was the only 2 or 3 hour period. I think it was a 3 hour period that the center was open. That was it. And it was just about about ready to close. Later on, we found out that the landlord had been told that we were going to be vacating in about a month. But we didn't know that at the time. We found that out a little bit later. Bob and I joined the board. We asked, well, first we started doing front desk. We were answering the phones and doing our little 2-hour volunteering and that sort of thing. And then in January 1999, we joined the board, myself and Bob, and along with Ray Mortz and Ray Ray's, I forgot his name right now.
Todd Burlingame.
Yeah, Todd Burlingame. And we found out about the leaving the site and given notice, and we reversed that. So that's the first thing we did. But our immediate challenge, I guess, when we stepped in, was just to keep the doors
Just
open.
popped up.
I'm sorry, what? Oh, sorry. So anyways, just keeping the doors open and paying the rent, paying the power bill. And we had about $750 in the bank account in those days. So, and we also found out that for some reason, their respect for the center had gone down a little, and quite a bit really, and we didn't have a lot of support in the community. It was probably good that we were naive to that time, because we really didn't know how bad it was. And we had no idea why, actually. And I still, to this day, do not know why. Although I can guess, and I just don't want to guess because it's probably not accurate. So that was the first thing to do, is just expand the outreach and get a few donations besides our own checkbook. And that happened pretty fast, actually. We did cover our rent pretty well, and everything was running pretty smoothly. And we were asking people to join the center. It was that kind of thing in those days, where people joined for $25 or so. And then we decided we needed to pull some of these groups back into the center that have still sort of use the umbrella of the center, but weren't really connected whatsoever. They're sort of totally independent, such as Pride. The Pride Committee was the first group that we worked with to pull back into the center. And now Mary Schaller had been running Pride since 1989, coordinating Pride, and throughout the years in the 90s. In fact, she was she was chair of the board once upon a time in the 90s, more than once, I think. But they had sort of split from the center because of various reasons that I don't understand even today. So that's the first thing we did, and we decided we needed to work on some of the other organizations that were sort of using our sponsorship, but not not responsible to the board, I should say. There was just no relationship at all. They were just out there using our 501c3, so to speak. So the first thing we did, I guess, is to put together an agreement. We did talk with a couple of attorneys, I think. It wasn't like a contract, but at least an agreement saying this is what needs to be done for you to be under our umbrella. And we started pulling some of those people back into the center, such as the Lesbian Gay Chorus, the Santa Cruz Radical Fairies, Youth Projects, the Queer Youth Task Force, Lee Lawson Productions. She published the La Gazette and the Manifesto, and also the Queer Youth Leadership Awards. That was the first. And we did have other groups that met at the center that formed at the center. One was called the Santa Cruz Trans. And then we had something that we inherited called the Gay, Bi, Trans Men's Breakfast, which we sponsored. And also other groups like Santa Cruz Organization United Trans Men, that's SCOUT, Scout. And also the LGBT Narcotics Anonymous and the GLBT Alliance. So that's, George, we by that time we were getting enough donations and input to pay our bills. We had enough volunteers to keep the doors open. And we were just slowly but surely improving.
That's amazing, Denny. I thank you for sharing those challenges and successes. Sharon, I would love to know if you could just share really quickly, how long have you been with the center? What did it look like when you arrived, and how did it develop and evolve since you've been there?
So I came to Santa Cruz in 1997 to attend UC Santa Cruz. And the Diversity Center was one of the places that I sought out and had heard about. And I remember how much courage it took at that time to walk through the door. And when I did, I found Bob Correa there that day, who gave me such a warm welcome. And going to the Diversity Center was an important place for me in my coming out journey. And that was rocky. And so I had that connection, and then I became professionally queer when I worked for then Santa Cruz Community Counseling Center had an LGBT youth program called Strange. And when I was in that program, I also joined the board of the Diversity Center, which Jim Brown was also on. And so I had those connections from early on in my own process as a participant, then on the board, and then I left Santa Cruz to go to graduate school and get more work experience. And then I came back and was fortunate enough to get the job of executive director, standing on the wonderful shoulders of Bob Correa and then Jim Brown. So, and the second question you asked was, how has it evolved? Can you ask that second part again?
Yeah. So how has the center evolved and developed? I mean, when I think of the Diversity Center, one of the first people I think of is you. And so I would really love to hear about not just what you've contributed, but like, how have you seen this amazing organization grow and change since you've been there?
Yeah, well, I'll say that this center has survived and thrived because of an incredible team of committed folks. I want to give a shout out to Mark Zamet, our current and incredibly dedicated board chair right now, who's on this webinar. And we've had, and before Mark was Claudio Schneer, who was our board chair for 5 years. And in addition to the chair and myself and the staff and the board and the volunteers, there's just always been a core group of folks who care deeply about our community and show up in incredible ways. Whether it's Dean Maynard throwing our gala, the best party in town, or folks who sit at our front desk to greet folks as they're walking in. So I think that we've had a lot of evolutions in the 8 years that I've been executive director. I think a big one was, Denny talked about Pride, Pride used to take a ton of time for the staff, and we spun that off to being really a volunteer owned from A to Z, but they're still a fiscally sponsored project. So they're still, Santa Cruz Pride is under our umbrella. They don't have to file taxes, they're under our insurance, but it doesn't actually take staff time to plan the whole event. So that when that happened, and that was about, now maybe 2015-ish, that freed up so much time and capacity at the Diversity Center to really develop our programs, whether that's, our youth program or our senior program or our transgender program. Everything that we're doing, really having it be more robust. I think many things have shifted and evolved in the last few years. We've really had big conversations about race and equity in our community, and really having conversations about how the Diversity Center has really been a white organization, and who do we need to be a more relevant organization to folks of color in our community. And so we had a big summit on race and racism in the LGBT community at Cabrillo College last year. And I think having those conversations have been really important to us and part of our strategic plan about how do we grow to make sure that we are a relevant organization for those in our community who need us most.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing about the work that is happening right now. It's pretty amazing. Jim, I would love for you to share, if you could kind of follow that same line of questioning. What did the Diversity Center look like when you arrived? And then how did it change and evolve from there?
Yeah, I'll start with the notion of how I connected first with the center, like Sharon. I moved to Santa Cruz in 1995 and worked over the hill, so I didn't really have a lot of time to connect with community. So my first entree to the center was Pride, and one of the things that I loved about Santa Cruz Pride is its hometown, welcoming, comfortable celebration feel, which just felt super different than kind of the overwhelming experience of the big city prides. So that really was my welcome to Santa Cruz and Santa Cruz queer community. I didn't actually connect directly with the center staff until probably 2006, when the board chair at the time, Terry Kavanaugh, invited me to consider joining the board. And I remember the first time I walked in the center, the one on Walnut Street, Bob had literally just gotten the news that they had gotten a $75,000 grant from the California Endowment to begin the transgender healthcare initiative. And that, in conjunction with a significant grant from the state of California for tobacco control in the LGBT community, really provided an opportunity to professionalize the center. It dramatically increased the budget, allowed the center to hire staff. So it wasn't just a volunteer organization anymore, but it was staff. It had a paid executive director. It had program staff and administrative staff, which really made it possible to develop the programs. I think the other evolution, kind of following along the same lines of what Sharon said, in 2009, probably 2008, shortly after I became the ED. We began the conversation to merge Diversity Center with Triangle Speakers, and at the time, the Triangle Speakers was an organization that was really supportive and connected to the communities of color in Santa Cruz, and the Diversity Center was not seen that way. So we went through this process of a merger, which really, I think, opened the door to the conversation that has culminated, taken years to get to, but that really wonderful summit that Sharon mentioned about raising up and listening to the voices of communities of color in the LGBTQ community. I think another piece that shifted dramatically, at least during the time when I was there, was the shift to around donor cultivation. The organization as it exists today, it couldn't exist as it does today without the generosity of so many donors. And there was a real process of reaching out and connecting with individuals who love this community and want to support it, and building the faith and confidence with those people to be able to invest in the center. And I know that Sharon's done an amazing job, really continuing that work and building those relationships so that the center can continue to grow and serve the people that it needs to. I saw in the chat, and I just want to do a shout out to Mary Schaller, who Denny mentioned just a bit ago. She led Pride from, I think, the 1980s or maybe the early 90s until probably 2008 or 9. And it was an incredible, almost one-person show with the support of others, but she was a powerhouse. And yeah, she has some interesting things to say about why the center was challenged early on, but I can talk about that another time. But she was a force, and I actually don't know what's happened to her. I haven't been in touch with her in years, so I'd love to hear how she's doing.
That's amazing. Thanks for that shout out, Jim. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it back to Rob now. Rob, take it away.
So we've heard from Sharon currently, and then Jim was before Sharon, and then Bob, you were executive director for a little while there. Well, I know you volunteered and then became executive director. Do you want to talk about some of the growth during the time that you were in charge?
Sure, Rob. So I volunteered with Denny in 1999, and both of us were volunteers up to the beginning of 2002. And in that time and in that process, what we were looking to do and achieving was, building back the organization to keep it open. And I have a particular philosophy that was in my mind as I kind of transitioned into the executive director role, was that the part of what was happening with the center is people had passion for specific communities or specific ideas of activities of interest, such as, the newspaper or newsletter publishing in Pride and other activities like that. And the thing is, to have the ability to raise funds and to do that work beyond just core activism, was you need some money. You need a solid organization so that you can have an appropriate nonprofit status, so that you could begin to seek funds to get some of the work done. And people involved in projects found out that they were also going to have to deal with the core organization, the community center. So when Denny and I got involved, our number one interest and activity and motivation was literally that nonprofit organization, the tax ID number. We need a good board. We need to figure out how to build some trust and wherewithal in the community to move forward. I had no particular experience in health services or social work, those kind of things, but I had my activism experience from High Tech Aid and from my own coming out process, and, just after 1980. So, and because I had my own business, I felt like, well, gee, I should start writing grants. I used to know how to write a business plan, and I knew how to go to a bank and say, I want to do this. And they would say yes. And, so I started to write grants, and that's how we converted from being completely volunteer to then essentially I resigned the board at the end of 2001 to become the official half-time executive director of the Diversity Center. Well, it never was half-time work, but it was a passion of love, and it was, we were just so motivated to do this, and Denny continued to volunteer for many, many hours during that time. So I went to a lot of meetings. We met with the local community foundation. We ended up actually with someone out there in the community who trusted us enough that the center started to receive what ended up becoming a 5-year anonymous annual gift of $20,000 a year. And when you think about Denny saying when we started out in 1999, we had $300 in the bank more than the $400 rent we were going to owe. That was quite an accomplishment and a great thing to have someone in the community support us like that. Then also good timing was with the grant writing. There's a foundation in Colorado called the Gill Foundation, and they happen to have something called the Community Centers Initiative. And 60 community centers across the country applied for 15 grants. And we were selected for a 3-year grant that included $60,000 of startup funding for the salary. So the idea was it was divided out over 3 years in a tiered way. So that allowed us, we also at one point had to move during all that. but now we could because we ended up doubling the space when we moved to Walnut Avenue. That was in late 2001. So that was kind of our launch. You know, we had started doing basic fundraising letters for people, or, you know, to the community to invite people back in, and we did a couple open houses, come and see what we're doing and what's happening. The peer support groups were becoming more energized again. We had so many new volunteers giving us a try. So, you know, to put it that way, I guess. But so that was really the launch of it, where we kind of grew out of this slump. Yeah.
Great. So you've all talked about some of the different stuff you've put in place: the organization, the board, the importance of pride, triangle speakers, donors and investments and grants, your work in the community, and kind of building different groups. As you think about those and other things, what would you all say are some of the more significant events in the Diversity Center's history during any time period, whether you were the executive director, where you were a participant? What are some of those important events or significant events in the Diversity Center history?
So is that still directed to me?
Whoever wants to answer that.
Oh.
So go ahead and start.
Okay. So as I mention these things, it's gonna sound like I'm kind of only thinking of the business and possibly money, but what my response to that is, before I even go into it, is to suggest that my vision was where we are today, right? We knew it couldn't just happen instantly, but without having a solid core organization, it would just be a constant struggle to be relevant and sustainable. So to that end, what I find is really significant accomplishments are the things that I started to mention, right? The generous anonymous gift for 5 years that helped launch us forward, the ability to be able to move into a new double-sized space, so we actually had room big enough to hold real meetings and at least small-scale social events, and so on. But also that continued the whole time I was there. I was trying to get some grant funding to provide real services beyond just the peer level. And as part of my time sitting in that office, there's one question you ask in there about a specific story. And for me, the specific story is the whole 8 years of the center. It's just amazing that people that came in with their stories and their needs and their issues, and they were all real. And it was just so important that we were there to be able to even just give a simple referral or listen to what was happening for that person. So for me, being kind of the only staff person literally at that point, but having all the volunteers that stepped in, I would kind of be switching between the business aspect of it, but never lost sight or priority of that. And then realizing the walk-in space itself was so important to the organization.
Can I pipe in?
Everything that, yeah.
Can I pipe
Larry?
in? Yes, just real quick. I think there are two other significant events that haven't been mentioned. One is the move to SoCal Avenue to a visible storefront, which was huge. And the second is the purchase of the building, which just happened. And it's another huge milestone. That's it. Thank you.
And so Jim or Sharon, you want to add into other significant events?
Jim, you want to go next, and then I'll get to the building. That's in my time.
Oh, unmuted now. Yeah, I think we've mentioned them so far, but to me, the getting sufficient funding to have our professional staff was huge. I think the merger with Triangle Speakers was a big move. I think the establishment of the Diversity Partnership Fund at the Community Foundation, which has provided such solid and consistent funding to the Diversity Center over the years, was a huge support. I have to say that the fight for and the winning of marriage equality and the joy that happened when the community came together around all of those first weddings was, that maybe that's not a milestone for the center, but the center was a big part of that locally, and it was exciting to be a part of that. And I was going to add the purchase of the building.
Yeah.
Sharon?
So the two things that come to mind for me is one, Triangle Speakers has been an amazing resource, and if folks know, it's a speakers bureau that goes often into schools, and it's a group of volunteers who share their personal stories. And it's really been incredible in opening hearts and minds. And it's hard to hate someone that you know. But what started happening is we started getting more requests from businesses who didn't just want to hear our stories, but wanted to have best practices. So that was a really big growth time for the center. And our current chair, Mark Zamet, one of his first things on the board was helping to set up that program. And now we've trained probably about 100 of organizations, government entities, including Watsonville City Council, and businesses, including Verizon Media, formerly Yahoo. So that's been a great way that we have. We also trained 500 healthcare providers with Dr. Jennifer Hastings. And so it's a way that we feel like we've been effective in not only supporting folks who walk into our program and into our center, but supporting people who will never walk into the Diversity Center, but still having a safer, more welcoming experience in Santa Cruz County. So that was a big thing. And also, clearly buying the building was a huge crisis opportunity for the Diversity Center really such a big effort when we had to, raise $800,000 in a week to make this purchase of this wonderful building. And we had, through calling some of our existing major donors, that folks were able to give us an interest-free loan so we could make the purchase, so that then we could have time to get an official loan. And I'm glad Larry mentioned that, and I'm happy to share with folks we're 89% of the way through that campaign. So, we're almost there, but that really forced us to grow up as an organization, to learn how to have this capital campaign. And we increased our staffing and really also doubled down on some of our programmatic commitments in the community. So it was a big, hard, wonderful moment and growth for the center.
Jim, was there something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to call out the Transgender Health Initiative, because that was a huge move and commitment for the center, and the partnership, in terms of influencing Santa Cruz, influencing the LGBT community across the country. That was the first program of its kind in the country, and it's a model that it was. Let me describe it first. It was a partnership with Planned Parenthood to provide both social emotional support for transgender folks, but also the health care support that they need. And it's an unusual specialty, and that partnership with Dr. Jennifer Hastings at Planned Parenthood was. She's just been an amazing resource for this community and has been an advocate for transgender health nationwide. the program that we established together with Denny did the grant writing for it, I'm sorry, Bob did the grant writing for it, was a huge win. And I understand that other Planned Parenthoods across the country are following the lead of that program.
Bob, some other thoughts on the building you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this up, and it kind of ties the three of us EDs here together, which is we actually, the space that we just bought, the building, we moved into that space in September of 2005. And that was actually my last particularly significant accomplishment as the ED of the center at that time. So it's just amazing to me that some of the pictures you saw in that gallery that you were referring to was when we were remodeling that space and moving in. And yeah, so we were occupying it for 13 years and then had the opportunity to buy the space we rented and the other half of the building right next to it. Very exciting.
I'd like to add my 2 bits.
Yeah, Denny, I was going to ask you if you had any significant events.
Well, I mean, it's nice and short. One of my pet projects, of course, and close to my heart was 2003, the senior 60 plus that we put together. That's a biggie in my heart anyway. The other thing I wanted to point out is that I think we picked great EDs, Bob, Jim, and Sharon. And also we have really, I'm so proud of the strong boards that we have today. I have no idea if it fits in with the questions, but hey, that's my 2 bits.
Yeah,
Great.
stuck there, Bob.
Thanks.
So we are starting to run a bit short on time, but I have a really great question I'd like to ask all of you. And I'm going to read it because I don't want to mess it up. But looking back on the history of the Diversity Center, what have you gained personally or professionally from that experience that you would like to share with future generations? Jim, if you could please start us off.
Yeah, so when I decided to apply for the executive director job at the Diversity Center, I knew it was going to be hard. I knew, because just to be completely transparent, I'm an introvert and I come from a tech background where I worked in a cubicle by myself. To step into a role as a community leader was a huge personal step. And then to do that as a gay man who hid that for many years as a child, to only just becoming comfortable with my sexual orientation, and then to have to stand up in front of sometimes 1,000 people, sometimes just a group of community leaders, and be an advocate for LGBTQ people. Yeah, I mean, it was a big risk, and it paid off in a level of comfort and confidence, and yeah, just an appreciation of who I am and what I'm capable of, that I would, that I'll always be able to lean on and treasure. So it's been an amazing experience for me.
Thank you, Jim. Jenny, if you could please share something that you gained personally or professionally that you would like to share with future generations.
Well, let's start with a real short one, the learning process. I basically had to learn how to work with volunteers, how to put together projects. I mean, I'd done that for a living with AT&T and Bell Labs, but it was a different world. That was one thing, and learning to believe, and really need to believe in the Diversity Center and what it could become. Otherwise, you couldn't put up with what we had to put up with in some of those days. And we did have some of those days, by the way, just like Sharon does and Jim did, I'm sure. And I don't know. I'm just so happy that it's advanced so much further than we could have imagined. This center's been around for 31 years, supporting itself. So, the next time someone asks you, tell them, hey, we have 31 years.
Thank you. Sharon, if you could please share.
It is a really incredible honor to work for and be so connected to our community. And you get it for the good and the bad. It's definitely an honor, and that it's not just I'm professionally queer. I have that honor, and it's not just going to a job or to work. It's that I get to work alongside folks who care passionately. So sometimes you can fight passionately, but there's mostly we are hopefully holding this vision for how we can support our community. And my kids have grown up in this center, and they've grown up going on stage with me. So I think it's been really sweet, and I think it's been a gift to them to see that their family, their queer family, is proud and has a really loving community, and that's been a gift to me and my family for sure.
Thank you, Sharon. And Bob, if you could tell us about lessons or personal experiences that you want to share, or that you would like future generations to take something from.
So the end of this will be that future generations need to think about their future and become involved. So to that end, that's what I did. That's what Denny and I did together. And be careful what you wish for. In some ways, in that you push past your boundary. A lot of my story is exactly very parallel to Jim Brown's story that he just shared. In the extension, so I'll add to that to just say that when so much started happening while the center was recovering in terms of marriage equality and the trans rights and so on that were becoming mainstream topics, I found myself being interviewed for TV news and writing things for the Sentinel, op-eds and that kind of thing. And when we got started, I had no experience like that as a public figure in any particular way. And yet we grew the center into a place where that became the resource where people came to expand their knowledge. So what I realized quickly that I had taken on as such a responsibility was the ability to represent all of the individual stories that the media wanted to know more about, or that we had to explain in a specific focused grant. And I took it very seriously, the responsibility of being a fair and a knowledgeable representative for those sub-communities.
Thank you.
I realized I had to be their voice to reach the outside, to reach beyond their own circle.
That's amazing. Before I quickly pass it back to Rob so he can wrap this up, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all of you who sat in on this panel for all of the hard work, the foundation that you've laid down so that I can enjoy the privileges that I have in Santa Cruz County. So thank you for all of that. Rob?
Yeah, and I'll echo that and say thank you for sharing those pieces. And just to close this out, the importance of the Diversity Center is important in all of our lives. And so I want to thank all of you for building the Diversity Center the way it is for all of us. And then just to finish this out, as you continue, know that we're doing these webinars on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have a feedback form on my website. If you'd like to fill that out, that would be great. And we've got some other webinars coming up that you may enjoy. So check out the new virtual exhibit at the Santa Cruz MA. And with that, I'm going to stop the recording, and then we can just talk about whatever else you'd like.